Hello, I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of Treasury Careers. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for our webinar today, New Year, New Technology, Evaluating Your Comprehensive Payments Program. I would like to thank our webinar partner, Comdata, whose strong commitment to thought leadership helps us make this webinar possible today. Modern finance and treasury leaders have been left with a delicate balancing act between managing their traditional operating functions and being the hub for uncovering strategic business opportunities. An often overlooked source for the latter, your payments program. With the new year upon us, now is an ideal time to evaluate how effectively you are managing across your AP, purchasing, travel, and payroll programs. Many treasury and accounting leaders are unaware of new low-cost technology to dramatically improve these functions. Today, we'll discuss how to evaluate technology and services that help companies generate rebate revenue on invoice payments, increase security and control, minimize the pain, hassle, and expense of paper checks, and diversify treasury relationships and establish new credit sources. Before I delve into the content, I'm going to offer a few quick words about Treasury Careers, cover a few housekeeping items, and then I'm going to welcome our featured speakers, Jack Sevier and Josh Raymond, to the webinar. Treasury Careers offers content and resources that empower Treasury professionals to own their career success. Our sister company, TreasuryJobs.com, has a plethora of Treasury jobs. We have Treasury certification resources and Treasury best practices on TreasuryCareers.com. And of course, we offer complimentary webinars like this one today. I encourage you to visit TreasuryCareers.com. Now the exciting housekeeping items. The slides are currently available under the handouts area in your GoToWebinar control panel. If you have trouble downloading the handouts, please send me an email at ernie@treasurycareers.com. For those of you interested in CTP credit for today's webinars, you'll have to answer all polling questions and remain on for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions on CTP credit, please send an email to ernie@treasurycareers.com. We'd like to hear from you, so we'd like to have your questions at any time in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll try and get to your questions at the Q&A session at the tail end of the webinar. Fear not. If we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. Finally, we appreciate your consideration in taking a short survey at the end of the webinar, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. It is now my distinct pleasure to welcome Jack Sevier and Josh Raymond to the webinar. Josh Raymond is Vice President of Marketing at Comdata, where he's responsible for marketing strategy, lead generation, product marketing, and sales development. Previously, he was product line manager for Comdata's commercial credit card solution. Josh has more than 15 years of experience in corporate strategy and growth-related roles in financial services, transportation, and manufacturing. He earned an MBA from Johns Hopkins University and a bachelor's degree from the University of Tennessee. Jack Sevier is the Director of Product Management for Comdata. He's responsible for product strategy and the development for the company's corporate payments products and accounts receivable solution. Prior to joining Comdata, he led corporate strategy and logistics, partnerships, pricing, and inventory in transportation and logistics organization. Josh holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Mississippi, a master's degree from Middle Tennessee State, and an MBA from Rutgers Business School. Jack, the floor is yours. Please take it away, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Ernie, and I wanted to say thank you to everyone in the audience for taking some time out to listen to us today. First off, before we even get into it, wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about who Comdata is. Comdata is one of the first fintechs really that's been around, and from our beginning almost 50 years ago. We've been focused really on nothing more than trying to get the friction out of the relationship between buyers and suppliers when it comes to transacting. Like we say, we're a pure payments company. We're not a bank, so we're not worried about any of the different treasury relationships that are out there. And we think that's important because one of the things we notice is that more and more organizations are having different treasury relationships for different lines of business, different divisions. And so it's important to be kind of an outside party that's able to manage all those relationships and help you transact from whichever treasury relationship you're using. Like I mentioned, we're solely focused on payments from our very beginning, and all of our R&D and innovation are really on creating better payment technology and services. And there are a few reasons why we believe we're unique in the market. Some of those we'll get to on the wheel on the right. First, though, I wanted to talk about we are a commercial card issuer, and we're actually one of the largest virtual card issuers and one of the largest MasterCard issuers in North America. So we feel that we have some experience from which we're speaking. Importantly, certainly with what we're talking about today, we're a technology developer, as we're going to be looking really into some technology solutions for moving your AP group forward. All of our developers and product managers are here in-house, and they're working on nothing but trying to bring some of the best tools to the market. Very important, we consider ourselves a data manager. We have some reporting tools that give you insight into both your own data and give you benchmarks versus the competition. And this is one of the things that Ernie even alluded to it a little bit in the introduction. More and more when you see interviews with treasurers, with CFOs, with individuals in finance organizations, they're really focused on taking their group, their AP group, from being a transactional cost center into really a strategic partner within the larger organization. And the first cornerstone that you really need to do any kind of strategic analysis is insight into data. A few of the other things on the wheel here, we're a network owner. We have some of our own payment rails. We're also a transaction processor. We do all of our back-end processing in-house. And like I mentioned, that with us being unique in the market, that gives us flexibility to really design some new and interesting solutions to really help you get your AP group off the ground. So moving on, what are we going to be talking about today? What do we mean by a comprehensive payments program? We really want to take a holistic view of AP. What are all the different pain points? What are the different ways that you're making payments today? And what are the solutions out there to alleviate those pain points? Now, some of it is going to be physical cards. Some of it is going to be virtual cards, both old and new concepts within those different buckets. Tools and technology. What we want to look at with tools and technology is really automation. How do we get out of doing manual processes? How do we get out of doing slow, inefficient processes that are riddled with errors and are costing you both time and money? And then one of the other things we're going to provide are some checklists that you can go over to evaluate your payments program. So first off, what are we trying to get rid of here? We're trying to get rid of checks. It says paper checks are expensive, and that's certainly true. Every time this has been evaluated, it normally comes in the neighborhood of around $5 for each paper check as a direct cost for each paper check that you're cutting today. So using paper checks, it affects your business more than you even realize, beyond just the hard costs or all the soft costs that go in with it. Checks are slow, they're inefficient, they're a perfect vehicle for fraud, and they're very, very old technology. And so as we look about moving into the future, how do we get rid of a lot of these inefficiencies that we find with checks? I'm not going to go over everything on this slide here, but there are some of the direct costs like the fees. Oh, there, thank you. Some of the direct costs like the fees, whether they're bank fees or the stop payment fees, checks and envelopes, delivery costs. Those are all the direct fees that are easily traceable. But some of the other things that you might not think about is for everything like tracing lost or stolen checks, auditing canceled checks, reissuing, corrections, and even with the checks and envelopes, there's a personnel cost with that as well. A lot of these processes are manual, they're slow, and they're inefficient. But amazingly, still full 60% of business-to-business transactions are done by check today. So what are some of the modern payment strategies that we're going to use to relieve these pain points? So we've got just a little chart here to kind of show you. We're not trying to find one payment strategy to get rid of all of your checks. It's really about looking at all the payments that you're making and finding the right solution for each type of payment. So in the bottom left, traditional cards, almost everybody is familiar with these. Obviously very good for your smaller transactions and the ones that are of less strategic importance when you're thinking about your travel and entertainment, office supply, really kind of singular purchases. Next up would be ghost cards. And if you're not familiar, I will say this, with ghost cards and virtual cards, if you're not familiar with these terms, we will go over them a little bit later, so don't worry. But ghost cards are essentially credit cards with no physical plastic backing them. These are for your suppliers who want to keep a card number on file. You see them a lot with utility companies, for example. Next up are going to be the virtual cards for AP. This is really the sweet spot. One of the things we noticed, certainly with the best-in-class users, get about 50%, can get up to 50% of their payments onto virtual cards. And so these are going to be for the vast bulk of your transactions. And then ACH, low volume, large purchases. But like I mentioned, it's really about finding, the different payment method that works for each individual solution. So thinking about your payments program and all the things that go into that, we're really evaluating kind of every piece of the expense side of your P&L here. Starting on the right with the workforce payment solutions, payroll cards are one of the interesting things, certainly as the new generation is entering the workforce. We've noticed that there's somewhat of a distrust of traditional banks. And so things like payroll cards have actually become a lot more popular in recent years. And these new products are really appealing to both the newer generation and some of the older generations of workers. Travel and expense management has both physical cards, and there are some virtual card products in there. Corporate card programs, not going to spend too much time on this. Obviously, everybody is familiar with the corporate cards, and it certainly still has its place today in your payments program. Where we are going to hit really hard, though, is on AP automation, some integrated payables, virtual card, and buyer-initiated payments. And these are the technologies that are really going to take you, again, from that transactional into a strategic line of business within your organization. So AP automation, we're going to talk about integrated payables. What is it and what isn't it? Because there are, with anything in fintech now, there are a lot of different terms that are being floated out there that don't have kind of a hard definition. So what do we talk about when we're saying integrated payables? We're also going to spend considerable time on the virtual card and really how virtual card really goes hand in hand with integrated payables and why it's such a valuable tool for your business. So first, we're going to go to our first polling question just to find out kind of who's familiar with these.
Great. Thank you very much for your great content. So as you can see, we launched our first polling question asking you to share with us if you currently use an integrated payables solution. I would like to thank everyone for their consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. Those of you who have an interest in receiving CTP credits for today's webinar, again, you'll have to answer all of our polling questions, and also want to remind everyone that we can take your questions throughout the webinar in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. Again, we'll do our best to get to your questions at the tail end of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for another maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Then we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at the results, and then we're going to get some initial thoughts from Jack, if he has the initial thoughts, expected, unexpected, versus what he's been seeing out in the marketplace. So I'm going to go ahead and close the polling question and go ahead and share the results. So anything there catch your eye, Jack, surprising at all?
No, I think this is about, generally what we expect to see here. Again, I'm going to be interested. I almost wish that we could repoll after we kind of go over some of the definitions that, as I mentioned earlier, integrated payables, virtual cards can mean different things to different people. But this is generally in line with what we'd expect. Okay,
great. Thank you, sir.
So when we talk about integrated payables, what are we saying? And you'll see integrated AP, automated AP, single file disbursement is one that I've seen, a payment hub, paperless AP, a lot of names for one concept here. And it's a combination of software and services to allow organizations to easily make invoice payments. And it's really about eliminating the manual processes. Most traditional accounting systems, when you think about them, you have to make multiple payment runs depending on if you're doing checks or ACH as cards. So what an integrated payable solution is you can make that one payment run. You upload that file into your integrated payables platform, and then it's the platform that stores all the information about your different vendors. And so it's able to identify the vendors who are going to be paid via check, via card, via ACH, and then it can process all of them just after you do that one payment run from your ERP. Why this is so powerful, though, is that you're still able to keep any of the different checks and balances that you have in place. So if large purchases need approval from a supervisor, or if there's different processes and procedures in place, depending on who you're paying, what you're paying, all of that can be stored within your integrated payables platform. And so it's really just making it that much easier for your staff to do business. Now, there are two models that we talked about here. In one of the models, your provider, your integrated payables provider, actually takes possession of the funds from you, and then they determine the best way to pay the vendors, and then give you some data back on the back end of that. What we're talking about here is where we link into and pay out of your own account. So you retain possession of the funds. You have the flexibility to make and change as you see fit, and you have the visibility into your transactions. And so, that's one of the differentiators between a few of the different models that we see out there. So one of the things I've been talking about a lot have been virtual cards and how virtual cards kind of fit into integrated payables. So we like to say that they're a key component of AP automation. And what is a virtual card? And again, it has multiple names out there. A lot of people will say e-payables. It's a check replacement tool. It acts like a credit card. It looks like, if you look at an image of it, right, because there is no physical plastic behind it, but it looks like a credit card, but it's actually more of a check replacement than anything else. It's tied to a single vendor payment, and it's issued for a specific dollar amount, and it is locked down to that. And this is one of the reasons why it's so much more powerful than a traditional credit card. If that virtual card number gets out in the ether, you don't have to worry about people running up a huge balance on it, because once it hits the specified dollar amount, that's it. That's all it's good for. It's safe, secure, and timely supplier funding with electronic remittance. And this is important because when we talk about safe and secure, and we're lowering instances of fraud here, that virtual card is good for one time and one time only, and then it can't be used again. With the electronic remittance that we send to your suppliers, that's a big deal to them, because now it's very easy for them to see what invoices are being paid. And so I'll give you just a little bit of a background on how this works. So when you send the payment request to your issuer, they generally send out an email that has the last 10 digits of the card. Your supplier will have the first 6 on file. They process that card just as they would key it into a terminal or a virtual terminal on their computer, just as you've seen many times at a point of sale. But along with that email, they get a detailed remittance file that shows them all the different invoices that are being paid. So for them, it really helps your vendors reconcile the payments that you're making. Integrates into your normal AP workflow. This is because there's a lot of integration work being done with various ERPs. And so it ties directly in, and you do a payment file. It comes straight to your issuer, and then they take care of sending out all the virtual cards. And it leverages your existing vendor pay cycle. I think one of the things that's not on the slide that's really important is why we started looking this way in the first place, though, and it's about rebates. I'm sure everybody has a credit card or two in their wallet that gives them some sort of cash back or some sort of points. You do that because there's value in that, right? This is an added feature to your card. And so why should your business not also have the capability to earn cash rebates for all the payments that you're currently making? So you're reducing your paper checks, which have a cost associated with them. You're earning revenue for all the payments that you're sending out there. It's really kind of a win-win when you think about a virtual card from that aspect. And that's probably the reason why, according to RPMG, who's a consultancy in this space, virtual account spending is growing 30% year on year. Now, one of the important things to think about when we're looking at this, a lot of people will talk about ghost cards. Ghost cards are a little bit different from a virtual card. So a virtual card, as we mentioned, is a one-time use, and it's tied down to that specific payment. A ghost card is essentially a credit card that just doesn't have a piece of plastic backing it. And so anybody who gets that number can hit that ghost card for a specific dollar amount up to the credit limit. And that's why I said this is used a lot of times for utility companies, things like that, people who want to keep a card on file and just continuously hit it whenever the bill is due. So that's an important distinction there that not a lot of people know about the differences between virtual cards and ghost cards. So next, how do the virtual cards, how do they work with your integrated payables? And there's a lot going on in this slide. We're not going to hit everything in detail, but your accounting system, you run a standard AP payment file. Often it's a check file, because just about every accounting system that I've seen is able to generate a check file. So you take that standard check file and you upload it into your integrated payables platform. Now, this is where the provider has all the payment methods set up. And so it reads the inbound check file. It batches all the different payment types to where they need to go. Again, check, ACH, virtual card. And then this is where you have some flexibility. If you need to split a payment for whatever reason, you only got half a shipment. Like I mentioned, your standard transaction flow, something has to go to a supplier to a supervisor for approval. All that is done within your integrated payables platform. From there, when you click the button, it sends the information for the ACHs and wires, it goes directly to your treasury bank, and then the payment is made on your behalf. For checks, it goes to your check printing facility. And this is a lot of times you'll see it when somebody moves to an integrated payables platform. They'll also outsource their checks to a dedicated check printing facility. Unfortunately, checks are so prevalent, we still can't get rid of all of them. But there are some specialized companies out there that you'll find can do them more efficiently than you can in-house. And then your virtual card transactions go over to your virtual card platform. The cards are generated and all of the remittance detail is sent over to your supplier. The supplier is able to process the payments, and then you get back all the payment data that you need for reconciliation. So it really is about automating what are so many manual processes today and making them just that much more efficient. So what are the benefits of an integrated payable solution? Paystream Advisors, who's another consultancy who studies this space, has found that cost to process transactions are 44% higher when performed manually. And so why is that? Well, it's because you have to do multiple payments. So with an integrated payable solution, you're able to execute all of these payments at one time. Virtual card, check, ACH, single payment run from your ERP. You can manage all of these payments using your existing ERP because all that data is connected in from multiple systems, business units, and locations into that payment hub. So you're able to manage everything from one place, seamless approval workflows, comprehensive reporting. You get to minimize the time spent managing the payments. Since it's all done in a single run, there's no duplicate process for all the different payment methods out there. So eliminates the need for batch processing, cash requirements, approvals, and all the different payment executions that have to happen. You get to further reduce your AP costs. If you use an integrated payables platform, you can push as many transactions as you can to more cost-effective solutions, such as virtual cards, such as ACH for if you have any vendors who aren't accepting cards. So fewer checks, less fraud, less cost, less printing, less postage. You get greater insight into your payment data because it's all consolidated into the central hub. Benefits easier reporting, a full view of your expenses. And again, with so many people really focusing on making AP, a strategic partner within the organization that really can't be overlooked. Lastly, you get to earn rebates. As I mentioned earlier, you get to earn rebates on all of your virtual card spend. One of the taglines that so many companies use is make your accounts payable a revenue generator, and that's true because you now have that active cash inflow. Not surprisingly, 70% of CFOs are actively seeking to increase their use of virtual cards, and as I mentioned, $5.14 is the cost per check. So, really, when you think about it from all sides, it's both a cost savings, it's a revenue generator, and it helps you achieve your strategic goals. So when you're evaluating your AP automation, the first thing you want to look at are your check processing costs. And again, as we mentioned, right, this is more than just that $5.14 per check. These are your hard costs. These are your soft costs. What are the fees that you're paying? How much on postage? But also, what kind of time is this requiring from your people? And do you think that your people can spend their time in more valuable ways than taking checks and stuffing them into envelopes? Next, you want to look at, you want to organize an internal discussion with your leadership. As we showed you, there's so much growth with automating AP. And so, one of the things that you can take to your leadership is that with that kind of growth, if you're not going to be automating, certainly your competitors are, and they're going to be earning a competitive advantage over you. And so that's some leverage that you can use in that conversation. But then what's your strategic focus for the group? Do you want to stay a cost center, or do you want to become that partner who provides the insight to your purchasing department? Without an automated AP system, you're not going to be able to do that. It allows you to revisit some of your payment terms. Without having so many checks in the mail, you get to reduce your float. You can speed the payment to the vendors. And so, that's some leverage that you can use when you're negotiating terms. And then you can calculate your potential rebates. A quick back of the envelope that we always give people is take 3% of your revenue. That's generally what you can expect to move into virtual card spending. And so then you can look at 1 to 2% rebate amount on that. And that's real dollars straight to your bottom line. Once you couple that with the cost savings, $5.14 per check, it's really a really powerful message that you can provide to senior leadership to really drive this discussion about automation of AP. So now I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who's going to go through some more of the physical card products.
Thanks, Jack. So as we move on, again, when we set this up, we said we want to look at kind of the entire expense side of the P&L and figure out where we can improve payments across those categories. And so we said, corporate cards, while if we're honest, are not a new technology, they still serve a really important place in your payment strategy for those lower cost and more frequent transactions. So this is a solution that's been around for a couple decades now and have been employed by many companies for general purchasing, for travel, certainly, and for fuel needs. So, let's spend a couple minutes on those just because they do still play such an important role in a comprehensive payment strategy. So before we get into that, I think, Ernie, this is our next poll question.
Yes, thank you very much, Josh. As you can see, I've gone ahead and launched our next polling question, just asking you to share with us if you currently use a corporate card today to pay your vendors. Again, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. In order to be mindful of our time, I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for another 5 or 10 seconds or so. Then we're just going to take a quick peek at the results and just see if the results are surprising at all to Josh. And we're going to get back to Josh's compelling content, and he's going to share with us how to do a corporate card program evaluation. So I'm going to go ahead and close that polling question and share those results. And Josh, have any thoughts here?
No, I mean, I think, typically we tend to assume that everybody has some sort of corporate card program. But in our work with clients, we see that that's not the case, and this polling data supports that. Certainly the majority of people on the phone have a corporate card program of some sort in place, but there's still a lot that don't. As an example, my wife works for a multi-billion-dollar healthcare company, and they don't have a corporate card program. When she travels, it goes on our personal card, and she has to manually file for reimbursement. So if you're in that no category, that's quite all right. There's a lot of good company there.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, so because everybody has a high level of familiarity with corporate card programs, we didn't really want to spend any time today on, talking about what those are or how to use them, but we really wanted to offer some tips on how to evaluate your card program for, the 70% of you that have one, and think about some ways that you might improve your program this year. So the first thing that's on the list is thinking about and taking a look at how you're reporting the purchases that your employees are making with those cards. Again, many companies still use a very manual process to report expenses and reconcile those cards. It may involve spreadsheet forms. We've seen clients that have to mail paper receipts around the country and sometimes get them, approved by a manager before they go into the central accounting office. And that's what really drives, this stat that you see on the right, again, from PayStream Advisors. They've looked at it and said that the average expense report costs about $20 for a company to process when you include the employee's time, the manager's time, the accountant's time. It really is a costly process. So as you guys all probably know, there are lots of software programs and companies out there to help you automate this process. If you're not using one of those today, we highly recommend it. Many banks and other card issuers will even offer you a free tool to use with their card. We do that at Comdata as well. So there are free options out there, but then there's also certainly the much more sophisticated service providers like Concur or Certify or one of those. The second tip that we've got on this sheet is to think about consolidating your card programs. And this is one where we do find a lot of companies are surprised by the option here. Lots of companies still have very segmented and siloed card programs for the type of use. So we see companies a lot that have maybe a purchasing card through their bank. They might have a travel and entertainment card program through American Express, and then they've got a fuel card through a specialized provider, because the data and the reporting needs and things like that are different for those types of programs. But there are providers out there that offer, what's called a one card or a multi-card solution. And so that single credit card can be used for all of these purposes and provide the different types of reporting and analytics and card profiles that you need. And the value of consolidating these programs is, first and foremost, it allows you to combine your spend volume across those programs, and typically you would qualify for a much higher rebate rate if you're putting all that purchasing volume through a single card. Secondly, it just makes life a lot easier for those of you who are in a centralized finance function, because you only have one card provider to manage. If something goes wrong or you need support with any one of these programs, you've just got one phone call to make and one partner that you deal with rather than three. And then the third and fourth points here really go hand in hand. We recommend evaluating your card profiles and your spending limits. It's a good exercise to go through, especially now that we're at the beginning of a new year. And this really boils down to security and control. you want to make sure that every employee who has a card is restricted to buy only what they need to purchase. So rather than having, cards just opened up to be used at any card accepting location, you want to obviously make sure that people can only buy from the merchants that they should be buying for. And once you have those controls in place, then we would consider or suggest you consider increasing the limit for those card transactions. This allows you to capture more spend and earn more rebates on your programs, but it also minimizes the need for purchase orders and you can eliminate more checks. Because if you do the exercise and get card profiles in a good spot for your people, you've improved your security and control. And so now you should feel more comfortable allowing those people to make larger purchases without needing to go through a big approval process. You'll have the analytics, you'll have the control set up to flag any potentially fraudulent purchases. So that's kind of the four things that we would suggest you do around your corporate card program. Okay, so if we move on to T&E, this is kind of a natural extension of the physical card programs that we just discussed. And a lot of companies think that if they have a plastic T&E card in place, that's really all they need for an effective travel payments program. But specifically within travel, unlike just general purchasing cards, there are some new technologies and new approaches and new strategies that are becoming more prevalent in the market that we wanted to cover with you here today. So when we think about travel expense management and we're working with our clients, we think about the end-to-end process from when an employee first decides that they need to travel, all the way through to those expenses being reported and closed out after a trip, and then getting reimbursed for any out-of-pocket costs that they may have incurred, whether it was tips or a cab ride or something. We want to think about that entire end-to-end process, and it's a complex one. You probably have multiple systems that have to be used when you travel. There's probably some tool or an agency that you use to make reservations. There's a booking system. You've got whatever expense reporting process your company uses. Certainly, you've got to use your ERP and accounting system to reconcile expenses. And then there may be a payroll system that's involved to reimburse employees. So as you think about your travel payments program, think about it across this entire process. Now, obviously, a good T&E card program is critical. American Express is kind of known as being one of the big players in T&E card programs, but we find that lots of other card providers and banks have really caught up when it comes to the controls and reporting capabilities needed around T&E cards. The big thing that we want to highlight here is an emerging strategy to use virtual cards for travel. So you can see on the far left box there, this is kind of a new technology that is being broadened and used outside of accounts payable. Jack covered virtual cards and their use in an accounts payable setting, but we're seeing more and more companies start using these in a travel setting, which has really been the norm in Europe for several years now, and it's starting to make its way to the U.S., which we think is a really good thing. So Ernie, our next polling question. Ernie, you may be on mute.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. As you can see, we've launched our next polling questions, asking you to share with us if you currently use virtual cards for travel. Like I said before, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions. Again, we can take your questions at any time in the questions area of our GoToWebinar control panel. I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for another couple seconds. Then we'll get Josh's initial take, and then we'll get back into a deeper discussion on virtual cards for travel. I'm going to go ahead and close that polling question. Go ahead and share those results. Anything stick out to you here at all, Josh?
Well, it just confirms kind of what we've suspected. So that number for integrated payables was much higher, which kind of includes virtual cards in an AP setting. But as I mentioned, applying virtual cards in travel payments is really kind of a new thing here in the States. So I am not surprised by this, and I think the next few minutes will be really helpful for those folks who either don't use a program or aren't familiar with one. So the basics here are very similar to what Jack covered when we talk about virtual cards in accounts payable. We're still talking about a 16-digit credit card number that provides a lot more security and control. Corporates still earn a rebate on the spending that happens on a virtual card program, which obviously creates a lot of value. But for travel, virtual card providers have figured out how to integrate with your travel booking systems so that employees can make airline, hotel, rental car purchases with a single-use card. And that can be done out of a centralized finance function rather than those employees simply making those reservations and making purchases with their plastic T&E card. We're also seeing these virtual cards displace ghost cards, where a travel agency might keep a card on file and hit that card for every travel purchase that's made. The reason that this is kind of catching on is that now with using these single-use cards, your accounting staff can tie transactions back to specific employees and specific trips in a much easier fashion because there's just one transaction for each individual card. You're not seeing travel purchases show up as just one line item among hundreds on a monthly statement with a ghost card, or it's not showing up within individual employee cards. So the visibility into travel spending becomes much greater when using a virtual card program. Now, the other value thing here is that by taking the big ticket travel items, things like airline purchases, hotel stays, and rental cars, and making those payments centrally with a virtual card, you as a company administrator can reduce the credit limit needed on your physical plastic travel cards, right? Because employees are no longer making those big purchases with their individual cards. They only need enough of a spending limit to pay for meals, maybe some cab rides and other incidentals while they're on the road. So you can reduce the spending limit on those physical cards, which allows you to really tighten up on security. One interesting data point to show here is that the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners looked at this, and they found that 15% of all fraud involves expense reimbursements, and it takes a long time to actually detect those things. So the value of shifting these purchases and getting security tighter around your travel program really does yield a lot of value. So if we go to the next slide, this is, kind of a basic process chart to show how this virtual card works in a travel setting. And I think this does a pretty good job of explaining it. So if we start in that upper right green box that says customer in it, that's your employee, that's the traveler. So when that employee books their trip, just as they would today, using your existing booking system, that system is integrated with your virtual card provider. And the booking data for that trip is pushed to your card issuer, and a virtual card number is generated. Again, very similar to the way a virtual card number is used to pay for a specific invoice in accounts payable. We're generating single-use credit cards for payments on travel. That card number is then pushed back into your booking system and used to make purchases with the supplier. So in this case, an airline or a hotel or a rental car company. That supplier processes the transaction just like they would any other credit card payment. And then your card provider sees that transaction is processed, and they deliver a notification back to you for your reconciliation and reporting. This probably looks a little more complicated on the screen here than it really is. I think from the perspective of your cardholders or your travelers, nothing really changes. This is kind of back-end stuff that doesn't affect your existing process, but it does yield a lot of value like we talked about. So there's rebates, there's greater visibility, there's the ability to tighten up security and control. So this doesn't have a material impact on your day-to-day operation, but it does provide a lot of value, and that's why we've highlighted it here as part of a comprehensive payment strategy. So our checklist, again, we would say review your travel policy. It's important to audit that policy on an annual basis to ensure that the proper spending limits are in place, and just make sure that the policy has the right visibility within your organization. Review who in your organization has one of those plastic travel cards. This just helps ensure that everyone who has a card needs one, and that people who don't need a card don't have the potential fraud in their wallet. And then lastly, just like we were talking about in the previous section, we would say take a fresh look at the profiles and spending limits that you have in place for your cardholders. All right, so let's move on to the last section. We're in the home stretch here, and the last section that we want to cover is the part of your expenses or your P&L that we kind of think about as workforce payment solutions. So if we move on and go to the next slide here. We want to just kind of level set on what we mean when we talk about the category of workforce payments. I think people typically tend to think only about payroll, and that's certainly the biggest category in this section. However, there are many other types of payments that companies don't often think about, and they're really important to consider. Again, if you go back to the beginning of our webinar, a lot of what we're talking about is how to minimize the use of paper checks, because there's a lot of bad things that go along with check payments. And paper checks still tend to rear their ugly heads in a lot of the scenarios that you see on the screen here. So we would encourage you to consider these different scenarios. These are things that most companies have regularly, but very few have figured out an efficient way to deal with them. So termination pay, as an example, can be really difficult, especially if you're based in California, where you're required to pay an employee all the wages that are due to them on their last day of employment. Getting those funds to somebody as they're being terminated can be a headache. Getting funds to your employees for things like special projects or events or per diems or other reimbursements for out-of-pocket expenses all tend to be problematic, and a lot of companies still use checks in those scenarios. These things can all be done electronically with a prepaid card. So the bulk of what we've been talking about today is how to leverage ACH or commercial credit cards as part of your payment strategy. Here we're talking about prepaid cards. And I won't go into all the details on the differences between a prepaid card versus a credit card. But the main takeaway is that a solution exists, and it's something worth looking into for these payment scenarios, especially if you tend to have lots of problems around one or several of these categories. So as we move on, there's just a couple things here that we recommend evaluating when it comes to workforce payments. Again, if you haven't heard us yet, we think paper checks are really bad. They're bad for your financial operation, they're expensive, and in a payroll setting, industry estimates are that it costs about $230 per year to pay an employee with check. Now, the other thing to consider here is how much it costs your individual employees to be paid with a check. There's data out there that shows that banking fees and check cashing fees rob your employees of a big chunk of their wages. Prepaid cards typically carry much lower fees, and they add a lot of convenience for your employees, which is why many companies consider a payroll card an employee benefit. I think it's important to point out here that employees of all kinds and all income levels see a lot of value in payroll cards. If you're familiar with them, people typically tend to think of payroll cards as a solution for hourly workers or, what some people would call an unbanked employee. But we find that people who are on direct deposit still like to use these cards for budgeting and managing their spending. So if you have an all white collar workforce, or you've already gotten to 100% direct deposit for payroll, congratulations. But we still find a lot of clients like putting a payroll card program in place because they view it as an employee benefit. So that's kind of it. We'll just recap by reiterating that across the expense side of your P&L, a lot of cost and a lot of inefficiency exists when it comes to payments. Much of those problems are caused by paper checks. So there are tools and payments products on the market to solve for all of these scenarios. And right now, early in the year, is a great time to identify where you can make improvements. So thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you listening. And I think, Ernie, we've still got a few minutes for questions and answers.
Yes, thank you very much, Josh and Jack, both, for that compelling content, very informative. For myself, as well as a former Treasury practitioner, I wish we would have had all these tools back when I was back in the Treasury game. First question I will direct your way, Jack. A couple questions around this. As far as the ability to send the file and then have your partner convert your supplier to the specified payment type, can you give us a little bit of background on how that works? Are companies comfortable letting partners negotiate with their suppliers, and how is that received on that side of it? So just a little more detail on that I think would be helpful to our folks.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one of the things that, due to the time constraints, we didn't really have a chance to go into is the whole vendor enrollment process. One of the things that we found is when a provider is setting up their customers, a lot of times the goal is, certainly if you already have a virtual card program in place and you're moving someone on to integrated payables, it's working with the customer to find out, what are your vendor relationships like? We want to help you. You've worked long and hard building and maintaining those relationships, and the last thing you want is your integrated payables or virtual card provider to come in and to screw all that up, by really trying to hammer people into a certain method of payment. So that's always kind of first and foremost with that your mind. The vendor enrollment process can take a few different forms. We found that a lot of customers don't even actually know that their vendors are already accepting cards. And so a lot of times it's a quick phone call. Are you currently accepting cards? Yes, good. ABC Co. wants to now start paying you with a virtual card. And so there's obviously not a lot of friction on that. One of the other things we've noticed is that it really helps, certainly with a dedicated vendor enrollment team like some companies have, it certainly helps to have that conversation with the suppliers to say, well, okay, if you're not accepting cards today, why is that? What are your concerns, and help work them through that. Certainly at Comdata, I'm sure other companies have relationships with dedicated business to business credit card acquirers, so you're often able to drive a lot of the fees out. Everybody seems to think that it's really high fees for accepting credit cards. That's not always the case. And then I don't know about other providers, but within Comdata, one of the things I talked about is we have our own payment network, and so we have other tools at our disposal where we can kind of meet in the middle, between what somebody thinks is a free acceptance, so like with a check payment. Oh, I just take the check and run it to my bank. It's actually what we find is that, when you study we talked about the $5.14, there actually is a hidden cost of check acceptance, and we're able to work with them through that and find out what's the cost that they have today accepting checks, and is accepting cards better for them, with the detailed remittance and reconciliation data that they're able to receive, the speed of payment. So there's a lot of benefits, and I think you need to have an experienced partner who's able to have those conversations, but also respects that relationship that you've built.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Jack. Two questions for Josh. One of them is a quick one, and then I'll ask you one that might be a little bit longer. Josh, and we're having a few questions around the number of currencies that are covered. Are all the products able to facilitate global payments, global currencies? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, but it's really going to depend on the provider that you choose. So with the card products that we talked about, whether it's credit card or prepaid card, those are typically issued with one of the major card networks. So it's going to be a MasterCard or a Visa or Discover. And those products can be used worldwide at any accepting merchant for those credit card networks. And so that works seamlessly. In terms of issuing cards, like, I suspect that somebody's asking because maybe they have a regional office overseas somewhere, and maybe they need to issue cards and reconcile in a foreign currency. There are card providers out there that do that, and some don't. And so I think that's just one thing that you'd have to, put on your list as you evaluate partners. But the capability is certainly out there in the market.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and launch our final polling question. Last question for you, Josh. Can you tell us for this year, is there some new functionality out there in any of these spaces that's really compelling, or what's coming on the horizon for folks to look for?
Well, I think a lot of what we've talked about today is still new. We've seen that adoption of virtual cards and electronic workforce payments is still really low in the market. And it's kind of just now starting to get a lot of traction, where I think some of the data I saw says that upwards of 35% of CFOs said they plan to adopt electronic payments programs over the next 18 months. But, for those of us who are in the industry and have been working around this for a couple years now, we see the next horizon as really what we would call that last mile. So how do we remove the friction for the company that's receiving payment with these products? If you picture the accounts receivable staff that's getting incoming payments from all their customers, and as more of those customers start to use virtual credit cards They're still getting checks. They're still getting ACH payments. How do we make life easier for that accounts receivable staff and streamline the process for them? Because while checks create a lot of pain, and there's processing burden on the accounts payable teams or the purchasing teams within an organization, there's just as much pain and suffering on the accounts receivable side of the house. And so we're seeing a lot more people try to solve for that piece of the puzzle to really remove all of the friction between buyers and suppliers.
Great. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to have to formally close the Q&A session. I'd like to once again thank our speakers, Jack Sevier and Josh Raymond, for their great content and their insights. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I would like to thank our sponsor, Comdata. We appreciate and share their commitment to thought leadership, which is also evident in the great content and resources they offer, which you can review by visiting the Comdata website. And please note you'll have the opportunity to request to be connected with Jack or Josh via our post-webinar survey that will launch immediately following the survey. Finally, the audience, thank you so much for your valuable time. Make the rest of your day great, everyone.